Nyawe, Dr. Jolene Rickard. It's an honor to be here. Sego, Sewagwego, Santee Smith, Tekaronhiáhkhwa, Kahnyen'kehàka Nation, Wagenyata, Oswege, Nidawageno. My name is Santee. My Ongwahoi name is Tekaronhiáhkhwa, which means picking up the sky or picking up the blue in Kahnyen'kehàka, the Mohawk language. I am Turtle Clan. I live in Oswege, which is also known as Six Nations of the Grand River Territory, a part of the Haudenosaunee Treaty Agreement. My company, who I'm here with at Cornell this week in residency, is called Gayogohó Dance Theater. And Gayogohó in Kahnyen'kehàka means to carry. And that's what the company does, and that's what I do as an artist, is to carry forward stories, culture, creativity, imagination, resilience, continuance, and our stories. And we do that through multimedia, mostly through performance, embodied storytelling. So we're working with actively embodying story. And collaboration. We do a lot of collaborations internationally and with other Indigenous artists and non-Indigenous collaborators as well. But really centering in positioning Indigenous stories and creators as key in the processes. So key creators, key creatives. And I'm happy to be able to share with you today this topic that I've been interested in recently, Intactness, fracture, and embodying shard knowledge. Not shared knowledge, shared too, but shard. As you can see in the video, there are shards there. Those are important for my family and for the recovery, the encoded knowledges that live within these shards that have been displaced and buried and forgotten in the lands in our traditional home territories. And so I will go through a little bit about what that means to hold these shards and to connect people's shards of knowledge and bring them together. And really this journey that I've come to in my understanding between brokenness and fracture and intactness and moving towards intactness. We can go to the next one. So before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge my ancestors and the matriarchs. So this is my great-grandmother. Her name was Mary Sky. We called her Small Dutta. Dutta means elder in our community. She was a corn husk stall maker. She worked with her hands. Here she's making a corn husk mat. She was Kahnyen'kehàka Turtle Clan. She held the Hiawatha title as a clan mother. And she was a gardener, livestock, and vegetables, and she was a midwife. So when I'm working and I'm having difficulties or I want to remember the strength of my ancestors, especially like my maternal line, I think of her. Before tonight's performance, I will think of her going through as a guide and to acknowledge her resilience, her continuance, and survivance that she carried forward. Next slide. This is my great-grandmother, Mabel Phoebe Smith. Again, Kahnyen'kehàka Nation Turtle Clan. I included her in this one. Usually, sometimes I don't include her, but it's important that I include her because I talk about her in relation to my work on the mush hole. She attended the mush hole or the Mohawk Institute from the age of 2 or 3. It's sort of debatable. And she continued her whole youth and graduated or aged out of the Mohawk Institute. And she went on to raise a really large family. My father remembers her as being very loving. Oh, and that's me in the cradle board. So she died in 1971, and I was born in 1972, and I was born in 1971. She was very loving, despite having spent her whole life going through the Mohawk Institute residential school. Next slide. I could probably do that. Her daughter, my grandmother, Grandma Bun, Alda M. Smith, again, Kahnyen'kehàka Nation, because we follow the mother line, matrilineal, matrifocal. She, in the 1960s, revived the lost art of pottery making. So for a time when colonial pots and pans came in and functional ware became purchased, the actual functional creation of our own pottery died away or just was not used. And our pottery just became museum pieces, shards within cupboards within museums, historic pieces. And I really, in terms of creativity, I really looked to her because she took it upon herself to question that and then to study and to research shards. So she went all over to museums, looking at collections, looking at the shards, where they were from, what designing was on it, what materials it was, the color, everything she could find about pottery. And she basically taught herself to hand build, and then later went to find teachers, and she then learned throwing on the potter's wheel, so she contemporized. Yet the look and the color was very much inspired by our traditional. She did these other things like leather work, and I put all of that in there because you will see the immense creativity and the ingenuity and the entrepreneurship that both these, my ancestor women, had, because they were sustaining their families through their crafts, through their creativity. And also I look to her as one of my creative inspirations. This is a piece of pottery that she gifted Queen Elizabeth in 1967. The reason why I show this is because if you look at the imagery etched on the piece of pottery, they are replica wampum belt designs. So this is a really amazing symbolic gesture and intention of gifting the crown, a reminder of our traditional and our treaty relationships. So it was not just, oh, let's give a piece of pottery, let's remember our relationship to the crown and the Iroquois Confederacy. And so that really signifies and continued throughout my family of symbolically representing story through encoded imageries, in this case etched into pottery, and being able to share that widely to our pieces of pottery within my family are around the world right now. And so her creativity, even despite having a mother who went through residential school and sort of that defunct family, trauma that happened, ended up being this massively creative woman. And unfortunately, she committed suicide. And so, there's those implications of historical traumas that come through. I'm the only one in my family who ended up doing dance as my creative outlet, aside from the pottery. So I trained at Canada's National Ballet for 6 years, and this is at the National Ballet. This is my audition photo. And ballet happened not because I wanted to be a ballet dancer, but because I loved dance. And my grandmother, Santee Smith, was the one who encouraged me to perform. She got me my first dance teacher after I broke both my legs. So I actually entered formal dance training because I had to learn to walk 3 times. And they needed something that would strengthen my body, and ballet seemed the best fit because I love dance and music, and it's about posture and alignment. So I trained there, but when you're getting to be your teens and you're questioning identity, I had to move away from home when I was 11, stayed in residence. When you're in an elite form of training, there's nothing else. It's the ballet world and nothing else. So I was missing a lot. I was missing my family. and identity started to be something I was questioning, as well as what was I going to do for my career. And I didn't see myself replicating, the stories that I was telling through ballet, Sleeping Beauty, Swan Lake, Romeo and Juliet. Those I didn't connect to, but what I connected to was music and movement. So I put the ballet world behind and really thought that, I'm not a dancer. I'm going to go on to do academics. And that's when I went to McMaster University and I got a degree in kinesiology, which is physical education, because it's the same program. They changed the name, which is very science-based. So I was thinking about going into physiotherapy, but I was not a very good physiotherapist. I would be very horrible at it. And psychology, and I really enjoyed psychology because, again, it was looking about, foundational stories of humanity, the human experience, and then I fell back into creativity. All this time, I'm doing pottery as my job. So the only real job I had in my whole life, aside from the arts, is I worked at the social science office at McMaster University as a summer student. And everything after that was pottery and performance. And yeah, I continued to do that. So in 1995, Gary Farmer, who was is a Six Nations-based actor, producer, creative, invited me to create 2 short works based on 2 of our Haudenosaunee, one Legends of Creation and specifically Sky Woman, and also representing the importance of our sustenance foods. And he wanted corn, beans, and squash, and specifically corn represented because he was working on a documentary called The Gift, and it's a National Film Board documentary speaking about Indigenous relationship to corn. And the reason why he invited me as a performer was to show that embodied connection to corn. We have song, dance, ceremony around corn, and that is, and of course we can't videotape ceremonies, or we can't go into Longhouse and videotape. So artistically, creatively, I represent that element of how important it was to us. And these are some examples of a choreography called Neo-Indigena that I did in 2014. And this piece here really started me back into creating inland and with land. So I spent time in upper state New York, which is our traditional home territory, creating in the land. So instead of being in a dance studio, I was out by the lake creating, and then figuring out how to transpose the work that I did in the land into a theater or into a studio. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background about some of the performance work that I've done. So this is an international Indigenous collaboration that I did between Maori in New Zealand. This is in New Zealand with Maori dancers, women from Mexico and Australia. And it's a part of a triptych series where since 2015 to the premiere of the last one is 2020, 3 works that research and speak to reawakening the power and the strength of Indigenous women. And that includes shifting our perspectives of who we are, who we've been told we are, and the colonial impacts that continue to corset us, our space, our thinking, our powerful connections, and looking at a lot of the colonial influences. First thing to happen is to silence the women, and for women to be written out of our history books. And that continues today. So again, we did work in the land, in the waters. Also, this part of the triptych series, that's Chara. She is from Fiji, she's Fijian. So we really enjoy these collaborations with other Indigenous artists and reawakening sacred feminine. And now I'm going to talk about the piece of pottery, the shards. So these are the shards that I made. All along this while, I've been working with clay. And whether it's making a piece of pottery, designing pottery, wearing pottery in the land, coming completely in clay. And then in 2021, the Gardner Museum put out a call for Indigenous public art. And a colleague, dramaturge friend of mine, Monique Mojica, sent it to me on Facebook. She goes, here's this call. And then, I was like, oh, that looks interesting. I can do that. And so I put together a proposal, and it was called Talking Earth, which is an extension of my family's work, Talking Earth Pottery. And that was shortlisted, and then I received the commission to make a large-scale piece of pottery, which will be a part of the permanent collection outside of the Gardner Museum, where it lives now. And really, when I was working on the concept for that, this idea of intactness that I've been working with in the triptych series of intact femininity, intact woman, intact Gayogohó woman, versus the brokenness and the fracture from colonization and the traumas that have happened through residential school, petrocolonialism, everything like that. So this sense of intactness and wholeness became prominent in my concept and the work that I was doing. And even within the dance, we held shards. We actually had shards and intact pieces of pottery, so visually representing an intact work and shards. And we had a teacup, a pot that became a teacup, and then the sharded pieces were a drinking thing. It's just, so we worked with that concept and those images a lot. So when it came to this piece, which is most recent, I proposed to do a large-scale reconstruction of a traditional vessel, and very Haudenosaunee, with a pointed bottom. And the concept was that we would build this giant piece, and then we would break it to put it into shards. So all of that work that has been accumulating over the time of embodying and brokenness and intactness and recovery of shards and recovery of the knowledges encoded in shards came together in this piece. And then I think the piece weighs 330 pounds. It's about this tall, but when it's placed there, it's like over 5 feet tall. And it's representing the four directions. The imagery on the piece, these designs are designs that I created based on what my family does of recreating geolines, our natural pathways, our encoded knowledges of balance and skana, and natural energies and natural force of what would be embodying, or I guess it's embodying when you're carving, but you're going through the pathway in your body of embodying which is the creative intelligence that exists in every living thing in the universe. So what that energy that people would call maybe spirit, or they would call great mystery, or they would call great spirit, energy and creation, creative energy. So that's all encoded in there. And this was part of the process where we had broken it and we were trying to reassemble it. This is what it looked like reassembled. And that's, if you go to Toronto to the Gardner Museum, you'll see that, and you'll see it from the street. So it was a whole process of breaking it. And people were following it on our social media because I was like documenting our process, and people were seeing this, oh, beautiful giant piece and the faces, and it was coming together. And then people started seeing cracks come into it. And they were, oh, I'm so sorry, your piece broke. I was like, oh, just wait. And then we went to the firing. It was like actually, it was a process of how are we breaking this. It was not easy to pull it apart and break it in the ways that we wanted to, because clay and earth is a mind of its own, and it'll dictate how it wants to break. And we're just trying to mold it into the shape that we wanted. So inside there's an internal armature that holds all these heavy pieces together, and we did have to put in there, like you can see them, screws and things to keep it together, because there's, a public art piece has safety. An engineer had to stamp it, so in case it fell over on somebody, that would be bad. And then we internally lit it with light. So when you look at it from far away, you can kind of see it here. Light shines through the cracks. And that was a visual representation of the beauty of brokenness. And that's what I have come to realize over the work that I've been doing, and in kind of shifting my thinking about brokenness, in that you kind of think, oh, it's broken, it's like you can't use it, it has these more negative connotations of thinking about it, but or when you think, oh, your people are broken, oh, it has this very dark negative thinking. And then for me, with the realization that in representing brokenness in such a beautiful, empowered way, was important for me to share that, and also to continue to share that in other works that I'm doing, especially this piece called The Mushhole, which we'll show as well. So a lot of the times, we hear all of the negativity about Indigenous. We've lost things. We're missing. Our culture is dead. We're only in museums. But no, we have all these shards of knowledge that people are carrying and holding, and it's only a matter of bringing them together. And maybe they will come together with spaces. Maybe they don't fit right back together, but there's some breathing room and there's some movement happening. And maybe they create different pieces. Maybe there's one piece that looks like this, and then there's one piece that looks quite a bit different. But that is the work that I enjoy doing, is imagining intactness. So I do embodied workshops, and we physically work with the shards that my family has connected in the space and with our bodies. And we do exercises like if you had a piece of sharded pottery, imagining the fullness of it. So you can, in your mind, think about what that piece what is the circumference based on the size of the shard. You've got an inkling of some of the designs on there. And then you imagine whose hands made this piece. Where did this earth come from? What were the stories that were being told when this piece of pottery was made? Who was around? So you can start thinking and thinking about those things. And as a part of that, this is the piece of pottery there. We put it up as the installation, and then my company and myself activated the space. So we activated the space through performance, and we 3D mapped my family history in pottery elements and elemental things on the facade of the building. And my daughter down here, she's covered in clay. In the end, I'm covered in clay. She's live singing and durational forming a piece of pottery. So it was like a performance installation again. And it was really to imbue that energetically, that space, and acknowledge the pottery and acknowledge my ancestors. And my imagery of my grandmother and my father and my mother are on the projection. And again, this line here, visually, even in the visual design, we're showing fracture, brokenness. And so that's not a, although it looks like a lightning bolt, it's a fractured piece of pottery. And here's an example of another example. So this is a piece of pottery that we made. Aside from making that one piece of pottery, we made 4 other large-scale ones just because you have to do tests. And this was a small test. Upstate New York for a piece that's yet to be done. We're working on it. We're all Gayogohó dancers. Some covered it with clay. The piece of pottery becomes my dramaturgical model. So that's a whole other idea of how the pottery is informing the work that I do. This is a piece called Bloodwater Earth, and it's a kind of remix, solo remix of the triptych series that we were doing. And you can see there's shards that we used in our imagery. And this is a little bit from the Gardner Museum. That's it. It's a little taste of some of the works that I've done, but it's, as I said, in clay, with clay, in earth, in land, in water. So, what? Oh, we have to go back to. Okay, so I'm probably running out of time soon. But part of this work is as well about some of our processes and actioning our ways. So I view what I do as embodied storytelling, whether it's the pottery because I'm sharing knowledge and story on the pieces of the design, but I'm also in my performances sharing topics that we research in community quite a lot. Usually if we come with production, we've got 2 to 3 years of research prior to sharing. And the performance that we're doing tonight called the Mushhole, we did 2 years of research before we premiered, and in continuous research. Some of the things that I have been doing is art sort of as remembering and activating and recovering our pre-colonial understandings. And I think that's what I'm very much interested in now is looking at pre-colonial ways that we viewed the world, which is not necessarily what is considered traditional today, because tradition has been influenced by colonial thinking. So how can we do that? We can look at encoded knowledges in pottery and try to think about moving further back pre-colonial ideas. We can look into language, but not conversational language. The root word, the metaphorical, the sonic, and the deep understanding of language. For example, this is something that's ongoing for me. I work with Dehahande Miller and others, and when we say, I mentioned the term Lagoa Sa'oyela, and to break that down, which is the creative living intelligence of the universe, Ga and Kahnyen'kehàka, when you say Ga, it means it has the intention of feminine energy, Ga. So already when we're thinking about this universe, it's feminine. It's from a feminine perspective. Stanza is great energy or great force. Goa means immense, bigness, greatness. Sa'oyela, anything to do with O sounding is the universe. So we could say Ojija, which means flower, or we could say Odzisto Warlunyo, which is the sky, or Onega, which is the water. So that sonically, that and you can go into look in the sound sonics of different cultures, and you can see certain things like mantras or like what they repeated and the energetic sound of that. And what else? Sa'oyela. Oyela means it is always in motion, so it's moving. So there was a sense that that's how we described our universe. In motion, in movement. So that's what I'm interested in. But then looking at natural pathways and decoding our designs brings us to the attention of, if we're looking at those types of knowledges, how can we apply it to our work today? How do we manage people? What is our ecosystem? How do we plan, create, program events that are in alignment with Sa'oyela, that bring about skana, which is balance? How do we build and sustain long-term kinship and relationality, which we know all of our traditional understanding is relational? How do we cultivate our spaces, which is how do we hold space, but also what is our space? Because as I mentioned earlier, especially for women, we become very diminished or very much smaller and smaller. And you can see that reflected in lots of ways. And then what are our ongwahoe dramaturgical models? For me as an artist, that's important. But if you're in another form, you would say, well, what is our strategic plan? Or like, what is our visioning? For me, dramaturgical models is how I frame my creation and my thinking. What do our agreements look like? Maybe we don't want to do contracts. Maybe we don't want to do letters of agreement. Maybe with something else. What is indigenous currency? And what does growth look like for us? So if we're looking at natural pathways, exponential growth is not good for sustainability and regenerativeness. And lots of people have been doing work on that, especially with environmental concerns, but it can go into every part of your life, every part of your work. And how do we invite and who do we invite into our processes? That has become a really important part for me, especially when we're collaborating, and we want to work in this way that is looking at pre-colonial, because, I mean, we've recently, as I'm moving more towards that, there is a bigger disconnect between those who said, oh yes, I would like to work in that way, and then they get into it and they're like, hey, wait, what about my, and then they rely back on their school training, or, you know, like that's not how we're working. And how does it foster sustainability? So I'm going to skip this one because we kind of talked about it. Here's an example, of how we're working on my company's model, sourcing everything through Kahnyen'kehàka. That was everything to do traditional, which would say pre-colonial language, natural patterning. And laws is a word, natural law, but it's more force. And these are the things that we work on in our dramaturgy. Pattern recognition, that's all the patterns that we have in our wampum belts, in our imagery. And literacy, how do we actually understand what's in those? Everything to do with universal or natural force or laws, not man-made. Form is created through the interaction of energy. So energies are around us all the time. And how does that shape us? Reciprocal and regenerative design, some of these we talked about. And then I want to finish, because we want to have some discussion. How does this relate to the work that I'm performing tomorrow? Tonight, tomorrow, tonight, No, we'll just talk about it first. In the fact of brokenness and intactness. So, as I showed my great-grandmother, she was born in Cattaraugus, but to a Mohawk mom. We're still trying to piece her story together. And she was orphaned, so we're told. She ended up at the Mohawk Institute, the mush hole, went through the whole school. And then through the work that we were doing through the mush hole, hearing people's stories, survivors sharing with us, in a lot of brokenness, trauma, broken families, broken identity, language, all of the things that has been associated with that. And disconnection, displacement, because some people were children were moved from different reserves. And then also the big displacement from our traditional territories of upper state New York. And really, what we're going to show, what we show through the mush hole is the truth, which is the hard truths of what happened at the school. And you can see the disconnect in our bodies, and and that's where it lives. It doesn't live in a happy ending, but it does live in continuance and survivance, the moving forward of that. People who went through all of this and still continue to work today and have families and recover and remember. So that remembering is a part of bringing the shards together, remembering parts of our stories. We can't remember it all, or we can't do all the work. We have to rely on others to help us. So I'll show you, this clip is kind of, I'll just preface this. So it's like a little beginning of the clip, shows, if you're not familiar with the mush hole, what it looks like. And then it shows some of the rooms that we were in. And then it shows, we did a little video this past year, and it is in response to the missing and buried children, which we use some of our mush hole create imagery and movement. And then we got a chance to visit the Thomas Indian School. It was like a week ago, and so it's a little clip of us in that space. So these are images from the mashal performance. That's my daughter. She was in the first version. This is the boys' playroom where we did our first beginning exploration in 2016. The boiler room. The laundry room. And then this was the video work that we did remembering the buried children. And this is a girls' dorm. This is us visiting the Thomas Indian School. This is the infirmary building. So that's a lot. Yeah, those are clips. Every time I come to do a talk, I always like mix up all my, so I had to add that Thomas Indian School visit in there because it was important for us to make that connection, especially because I actually have two cousins who went there as well. They're passed on now, but that history in coming to stateside, we were at UB and now here, of acknowledging that, this happened, all those fractures across North America, Turtle Island. And so really part of what we're doing, even by sharing this, is for it to be in people's understanding and then trying to make opportunities to dialogue about it, and then almost like bringing these shards of knowledge. So we visited there and we were, we heard people's stories, and that's another, basket of knowledge that we can add to our work. So I'll finish it there. Now, thank you.